You don't need to run for that. That's 4.
Have you ever seen a cricketer lose everything? Not because he wasn't good enough, not because he lacked discipline, but because he was simply too different. Kevin Pietersen didn't fail English cricket failed him. His career is not a story of wasted talent, it is a story of extraordinary ability colliding again and again with tradition, authority and expectation. Before the switch hits, before the Ashes centuries, before the controversies that came to define his exit, Kevin Pietersen's story begins far away from England. It begins in South Africa. Born in 1980, Pietersen grew up in a country where cricket was deeply woven into identity and opportunity. From an early age he stood out, not because of his talent, but because of his personality. He was confident to the point of arrogance, fiercely competitive and unapologetically expressive. He didn't want to blend in, he just wanted to dominate. As a young cricketer, Pietersen's ability was obvious. He scored runs for fun at school and provincial level, but South African cricket at the time was a very difficult system to navigate. Selection was political, competition was fierce, and patience was often demanded by players who believed they were ready. Pietersen felt blocked. Whether that belief was fully justified or not, it came to shape the defining decision of his career. Through his English-born grandmother, Pietersen qualified for an English passport. At just 19, he left South Africa for England, a move driven by ambition, frustration, and a deep belief in his own ability. It was a decision that would later follow him everywhere he went. To some, it marked him as opportunistic. To others, it marked him as fearless. To Pietersen, it was just simply necessary. When he arrived in English county cricket, Pietersen didn't arrive quietly. Playing for Nottinghamshire, he immediately drew attention to himself. His batting did not look English at all. His stance was open, his backlift was high, and his intent was aggressive. He attacked bowlers rather than respecting them. He took on spin rather than surviving it. In a system that prized restraint and patience, Pietersen looked like a challenge to everything English cricket believed about itself. But runs always have a way of forcing acceptance. Pietersen scored heavily in county cricket, and by 2004, England had little chance but to select him. Even then, there was suspicion. He was English on paper, but not in accent, not in temperament, and certainly not in style. He was an outsider stepping into one of sport's most traditional games, and that tension in itself exploded into brilliance during the 2005 Ashes.
Warne again. Nobody out there. Could have had to be in the stand anyway.
Facing Australia, the strongest team in the world, Pietersen announced himself with an innings that felt revolutionary. At Lord's, under immense pressure, he counter-attacked with freedom and confidence. Reverse sweeps, pull shots, no deference to reputation. He didn't bat to survive, he just batted to dominate. England went on to win the Ashes in one of the most spectacular fashions, and KP became a star overnight. His 158 at the Oval remains one of the most defining innings in Ashes history. He was young, fearless, and spectacular. English cricket, desperate for a renewal, embraced him, but only on the surface, because beneath the celebration, the discomfort remained. Pietersen didn't want to score runs, he wanted to influence. He continuously questioned methods, challenged coaches, and spoke openly in the dressing rooms that preferred quiet conformity. For some teammates, he was inspiring, but for others, he was exhausting, and for administrators, he was a difficult task. Yet, if we judge him purely as a batsman, his value was undeniable. Pietersen scored centuries across continents. He was one of England's greatest players of spin, particularly in Asia. His ability to manipulate fields and shift momentum made him uniquely dangerous. On his day, he wasn't just England's best batsman, he was among the best in the world. In 2008, England made a decision that would change everything. They handed KP the captaincy. It should have been the peak of his career, instead it became the beginning of the end. His leadership clashed almost immediately with head coach Peter Moore's. Communication broke down, trust eroded, results suffered. Within months, Pietersen was stripped of the captaincy in a highly public and damning manner. The episode left deep scars. Pietersen felt humiliated, England's management felt justified, and the relationship between player and institution was permanently fractured.
He's gone miles and miles and miles into the stand.
Despite this, Pietersen continued to perform. During the 2010-11 Ashes series in Australia, he was England's leading run scorer, playing a crucial role in one of England's greatest ever series victories. England rose to number 1 in the Test rankings, and Pietersen was central to that success. But the narrative around him had changed. He was no longer judged solely on performance, he was judged on harmony, on culture, and on whether or not he fit into this team. The controversy during the 2012 tour of South Africa marked the moment when the fragile relationship began to collapse. During the series, it emerged that Pietersen had been exchanging text messages with players in the South African camp. including comments that were interpreted as critical of England's captain and management. While the exact tone and intent of those messages were debated, the perception alone proved damning. To England's leadership, this was not simply about communication, it was about trust. Pietersen was accused of undermining team unity by sharing private frustrations with the opposition players during an ongoing series. In a sport built heavily on loyalty, discretion, and internal boundaries, this crossed an invisible but deeply important line. For Pietersen, the situation felt a lot more complex. He argued that the messages were exaggerated, taken out of context, and reflective of long-standing tensions rather than active disloyalty. He felt exposed rather than protected, and misunderstood rather than confronted directly. The fallout, however, was swift. Pietersen was dropped for the final test of the series, formally disciplined and publicly criticised by England's management. Although he was later reintegrated into the team, something fundamental had changed. The episode reinforced the belief within the England setup that Pietersen was an unpredictable and difficult player to manage, regardless of how many runs he scored. From that point onward, Pietersen was no longer viewed as a complicated asset, he was viewed as a risk. And in elite sports such as cricket, once a player is seen as a risk to the culture rather than a contributor to success, their position becomes increasingly fragile. Even so, Pietersen continued to deliver moments of brilliance.
That's a massive hit up in the air.
Later in 2012, he produced one of the finest innings of his career. A majestic century in Mumbai against India. Against spin in hostile conditions, he controlled the game with patience and authority. It was an innings that should have silenced any remaining doubts about its value. Instead, it just felt temporary. After the disastrous 2013-14 Ashes tour, England looked for a change. Pietersen, despite being England's top run scorer in the series, was dropped. Officially, it was about rebuilding. Unofficially though, it was about culture. At 33, one of England's most gifted batsmen was effectively exiled from the Test team. Kevin Pietersen never went on to play for England again. So, how should his career be judged? Statistically, he stands comfortably among England's greats. Over 8,000 Test match runs, match-winning performances across the world, an average that reflects sustained excellence. But numbers alone don't explain Kevin Pietersen. He changed what was possible for an England batsman. He proved that flair and freedom could succeed at the highest level. He inspired a generation to play without fear, and he forced English cricket to confront uncomfortable questions about individuality, control, and progress. Kevin Pietersen didn't finish his career on his own terms, but greatness in itself isn't defined by endings alone, it's defined by impact. He didn't just challenge bowlers, he challenged English cricket in itself. And whether they were ready for him or not, Kevin Pietersen changed the game around him forever.